So we now enter into the 8th week of Ordinary Time. There's 34 weeks in Ordinary Time, so we have a long time to go before we hit our next liturgical season, which will be Advent. So we're going to journey through, the many books here in Scripture. As I like to do, I always like to, during daily Mass, preach a little bit more on the first reading, because my theory behind it is you guys are here every day. I see your lovely faces. You hear the Gospels all the time, so I figured this would be another time to explore into some of the more obscure books, like the book of Sirach, which we enter into today. Much later into the book of Sirach, we're in chapter 35. Book of Sirach, like I said, it's a little bit hard for me to preach on because there's really no narrative. There's no story to follow. It's a collection of wisdom sayings, okay? But something did strike me as I was putting on these vestments this morning. It's a book we can really relate to, okay? Because this book was written around 200, 100 BC. During that time in Israel, there's been a large, large movement of Hellenization, okay, which means it's Greek. A lot of the Greek culture and Greek influences were penetrating into Israel. Maybe many of the teachers and people were adapting the Hellenistic way of life and abandoning their Jewish way of life. Okay. So what we could say is that Israel is becoming secularized. Okay, and that's why this book was written. Book was written to develop a great appreciation of the Jewish faith, the faith in the one God, and the many things that are entailed in that. So in particular today, it begins with to keep the law. So the writer wants their hearers to have a devotion to the law, okay, which again, I can imagine during that time has been forgotten. Okay, people aren't following the law of Moses. And he says to keep the law is a great oblation. It's a sacrifice. All right? Keep the law is a sacrifice. So he wants us to say what? To follow the law is to form a great sacrifice, and he even specifies a sacrifice, a peace offering, which was about what? That type of sacrifice, a peace offering sacrifice, was about what? Developing a deeper relationship with God. And so with all that, if we can kind of apply it to, for example, marriage. When you guys are married, or really any relationship, but in particular marriage, there's a sort of implicit law that's stated amongst the couples. There's things that you do and you don't do once you're married. And you don't have to go out and say it. Actually, if you do have to say it, it's probably a red flag in the marriage. So if you have to tell your husband not to go around and spend time with other women, like if you have to explicitly state that law to him, or her, in the other case, there's probably something wrong there, okay? That's the purpose of the law. It's to enhance the relationship, not to be a hindrance to it, and not to restrict or enslave someone, but to give them freedom in the relationship with God. And so the rest of the first reading here talks about, okay, what does the law entail? To perform works of charity, to avoid evil, to be just, to avoid injustice, and then also to freely give of that sacrifice into the relationship and to freely give it with a joyful heart. And that to give to the Most High as he has given you generously according to your needs. And then he says, for the Lord is the one who always repays and will bring back to you sevenfold. That as you give to the relationship, you follow the law, therefore you make sacrifices, okay, for the sake of the relationship, God is going to repay you 7 times fold. But then he also adds, but offer no bribes to God. These he does not accept. Trust not in sacrifice of the fruits of extortion. meaning that we don't perform the good deeds. We don't do the follow the law, for example, for the purpose of bribing God to get something back in return. God given back is just the fruit of the relationship. But again, we can even twist that a little bit. God, if I do this, then you have to do this for me. That's bribery. That's extortion. But I think a lot of times we all do this kind of in our prayer life. We treat God as a genie, God who's going to grant us wishes if we do what is right and say the numberless prayers and that type of thing. We miss the whole aspect of the relationship. Okay, we follow the law. Okay, now the new law written in our hearts, all for the purpose of what? Of deepening our relationship with God. And if we're generous with ourselves, and we really treat and give our offerings of ourselves to God our Father, he will gladly return even more so what it is that we give. But remember, we always got to let God do it on his own terms. And also with us, to freely give of ourselves on our own terms as well. May God bless you.